Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Hello Velocity podcast. Today, I'm excited to be continuing our conversation about different ways that we self sabotage. I've decided this is going to become a bit of a mini series since our last episode was about procrastination. And today, we're going to continue the conversation, but now look at perfectionism. And then our next episode will be people pleasing. So, I call these behaviors self sabotage because they really are things that we're doing that are getting in our way, whether it's slowing us down from our goals, whether it's disconnecting us from other people, or it's honestly a lot of times just causing us extra stress, anxiety, and worry that seems honestly, most of the time, it's actually unnecessary. The problem with all of these, though, is that they have become so ingrained in who we are and how we behave that they're basically automatic behaviors for most people. Most of us have been doing some version of this our whole lives or most of our lives, so it becomes honestly just this automatic habit and automatic behavior that we don't really even think about anymore. We just do it. So today and in this mini series about self-sabotage, I really want to dig into more of the root of what's causing these so that you can better understand them. And for most people, these behaviors are something they're very aware of, or they know they've been doing it, so it's no surprise when I'm going to be introducing you to these topics. But what's new here is understanding the why behind it, or the different angles that we are approaching these, or the different reasons that they're coming up. I want to dig deeper into these as a way to help you understand it better, understand yourself better, why it's showing up, why you're stuck in this pattern, why you're stuck in this automatic behavior, as a way to almost give it less power so that you can then, in turn, make it more of a choice. And this is one of those things, again, it's typically an automatic kind of knee-jerk reaction, and I want you to be able to get to a point where you can now slow down and decide whether or not you want to do that behavior. Instead of it just being something that you do without thinking about it, I want you to start thinking about it more, understanding the root of it, and then choosing whether or not you want to continue it. And unfortunately with these, again, since it's something we've probably been doing most of our lives, it's going to be hard to break up with these habits and behaviors. And unfortunately, it's not just a light bulb switch that we can turn on and off. It's something that's going to take some time. It's going to take some practice. So give yourself grace. Don't expect that you're going to be able to stop any of these behaviors overnight. But it is a gradual, slow, and steady practice to shift our behaviors and choose in the moment whether or not to do it. And you'll see different situations that they come up, and you'll start to think about it more and more, and it'll become easier and easier over time. So let's dive into perfectionism. Perfectionism as a whole is this idea that you won't settle for anything less than perfect. For most people, it comes up in your behavior, it comes up in your work, it comes up in basically any title that you hold, whether it's literally your role at work, or it could be your title as mother, as sister, as daughter, as friend. This is so important to recognize just in itself as a whole, is that we, as perfectionists, I'm going to say we because I'm also there and it's something that I work through all the time, is that we as perfectionists are setting the bar extremely high for ourselves when not everyone does this. You might be surprised to hear that not everyone wants to be the perfect everything to everyone else. When we have these really high expectations of we have to give our 100%, honestly, actually, it's usually our 110% to anything we're doing, when really a lot of the times our 80%, our 70% would still be plenty, would still get the job done. It would still be plenty, whatever the situation is. We would still get done what we need to get done. We would still be seen in a positive light to those in the situation or those in the relationship that we're in. And honestly, our 70 to 80% as a perfectionist is likely other people's 100%. So thinking about it that way could help you normalize pulling back a little bit and not setting such high standards for yourself and such high bar for yourself, because we're stressing ourselves out. We're pushing ourselves in every single aspect of our lives, trying to be the best, trying to do the best that we can, when really we don't always have to give 110%. That's exhausting. It's so much work, it's so much energy, and we're doing it for various reasons that honestly are unnecessary. And we're going to talk through those various reasons today. And as always, even if this doesn't resonate with you specifically, if you don't resonate as a perfectionist, It's still really helpful for you to know because I guarantee there's someone in your life or your work who will resonate with this. And it'd be helpful for you to get a little bit better understanding of where they're coming from their perspective, so that you can work better together with them, so that you can hold more space for them if it's your spouse, if it's your friend, if it's a family member. So, similar to our last episode about procrastination, I want to go through 3 most common types of perfectionism that I see with my clients and how that shows up, what it looks like, and what are some of those motivating factors behind it so that you can better understand it for yourself and potentially make some changes in your life, in your habits, in your work so that you can honestly work smarter, not harder, and pull back the reins as a perfectionist and not wear yourself out and turn into someone who's burnt out and overwhelmed. The first and most common type of perfectionism that I see is the perfectionism as a way to control. And this is literally you want to control every detail of whatever process, whatever plan, whatever thing it is that you're executing, whether it's in your personal life, your work life. Maybe it's a project you're working on, maybe it's planning a trip or planning a home renovation project, but you want to control every single detail that's involved. You want everything to go perfectly along the way. You probably have this really clear plan you've laid out. You know exactly what you want each step to look like. You know exactly what the end result needs to look like, and you want everything to go according to this brilliant plan that you made up. I also see this as the people who tend to be in the all or nothing mentality where it either has to go perfectly or I don't want it to go at all. So it either needs to go according to this perfect plan, or as soon as something gets derailed, as soon as something changes along the way, you are likely someone who may give up, step away, or maybe even blow it up entirely as a way to avoid having to pivot, adapt along the way. You want things to go word for word according to your plan, or else it's all for nothing, or so it feels. So obviously, someone in this boat gets really attached to their plan along the way. You likely get really sucked into the details of the planning, of the execution. You maybe go down different rabbit holes of trying to learn as much as you can about how this needs to go, and you are throwing yourself into it 110%. Obviously, this is going to cause a lot of extra stress, energy, maybe some anxiety along the way as you're trying to control all of these different factors involved in whatever the project is. When things don't go according to plan, you're likely the person who is going to be in a really bad mood. You might start snapping at the other people involved. You're going to get very short-tempered. You're going to get really upset, honestly, and it's going to be hard to bring you back to more of a neutral or positive state around this project. It's one of those things that, if something throws you off course, it might ruin the rest of your day, the rest of your week. It's hard to get back on track once this happens for you. So obviously this type of perfectionism seems at the surface really helpful because you want things to go well and you have the best intentions going into a project. However, you usually end up hurting yourself more because you're stressing out about all these details. You're usually alienating yourself against other people who are involved in the project, and it's just going to cause more stress and anxiety along the way. Usually people who are in this boat are doing this form of perfectionism because they want to control everything because they can't control things in other areas of their life. So maybe they're clinging on to some sort of control here as kind of a coping mechanism of, okay, things in my personal life are a little haywire right now. I'm going to try to control as much as I can at work and get really in the weeds and get really detailed on it because it's the only place I feel like I can have control. And again, a lot of this could be subconscious. So take some time to think about you. If this is you, take some time to think about, okay, what's kind of the root cause of this? What are the emotions behind it? Why do I feel like I need to control every detail? And other times for people, it could be honestly just a behavior that we've had since we were a child. It could be a similar thing where we didn't have control or didn't feel like we had control as a child, or there's some sort of childhood trauma or things that have happened in the past that are still unhealed, that we haven't worked through. And this is just kind of a symptom of that and how it's showing up as an adult. So you may need to sit with this some more. Honestly, therapy is a great place to explore some of this, where it's maybe more of those childhood stories and situations or traumas that have happened that you might need to work through because they're showing up in different ways still today. Some of the best techniques I've found for helping people who are in this perfectionism as a way of control is to remind yourself that change is inevitable. This is one of those things you are really attached to control, you're really attached to a certain plan or the steps along the way, and that is setting yourself up for failure because change is going to happen. It is inevitable, and it's just something you need to be mentally prepared for going into a new project or a new situation where your perfectionism is coming up. So remind yourself, change is inevitable, it's going to happen, and maybe that in itself might allow you to be more open to change, more open to being adaptable and flexible along the way, and help you step back from some of those perfectionism tendencies and not waste too much energy being attached to a plan that will inevitably need to change along the way. Another piece that's super important here is when things don't go according to plan, ask for help. Like I mentioned earlier, this form of perfectionism, you're usually alienating yourself against other people involved because you're so attached to this plan. So I want you to do something new and do something different. And that looks like actually asking for help. Instead of pushing people away, I want you to ask for help. Ask other people to brainstorm ideas of how we can be more adaptable and how we're going to handle this change or how we can approach this differently. And it will help take some of the burden off your shoulders as a perfectionist who likely usually puts it all on themselves and wants to do everything perfectly. And they tend to want to control everything and do everything themselves. I want you to ask for help and see if other people can step up or are willing to step up to help you so you don't have to do it all yourself. The second type of perfectionism I tend to see is perfectionism as a way to win approval. So this is that you want other people to like you, maybe you want to fit in or blend in more, or you want to get on someone's good side. So you put on this face, you try to be perfect at everything you do and how you're showing up around these other people with hopes of getting them to like you. And with all of these different types of perfectionism, they may all intertwine. You may resonate with all three of them. You may resonate with just one of them. But think about maybe for you, which comes up most often, but then also how they might be related for you. This type of perfectionism I really do see as the putting on a face. So this one is a little bit more about how you're being seen by other people, where the first one we talked about is more about how you feel throughout the process and how you're executing a project, where this is less about your own feelings and more just how you think you're being perceived by other people. So you're still setting that super high bar for yourself, but it's almost more of a social bar or a performance bar that you think you have to hit a certain criteria or show up a certain way or perform a certain way or talk a certain way, look a certain way, things like that of how other people perceive you in order to win their approval, in order to be liked by them. Or in a work setting, it could be you think you have to look, talk, act a certain way in order to get to the next level, in order to get promoted, in order for your boss to like you. So this was definitely me when I was in corporate America. I refer to myself during this phase now as Robot Brittany, where I could tell looking back now that I would just go through the motions of what I think I needed to be doing, setting a very high bar for my performance, my expectations. And it was not so much for myself. I realized it was for my perception of how other people saw me so that I could climb the corporate ladder faster. And it was those external expectations that I was putting on myself of what I thought I should look like, I should do, how I should talk. And yes, there are certain professional standards that we want to be hitting. And in order to get to the next level, you do probably start to mimic other people around you or above you in order to blend in more. But the way this type of perfectionism shows up is that it's a super high bar and you're really distancing yourself from yourself. You're not as authentic as you likely want to be or need to be in order to connect with other people. So it's like you're putting on a show, you're putting on that face in hopes of connecting better with other people or in hopes of them liking you more. But honestly, usually you're just distancing yourself further from them because you're not being your true self. That idea of putting up a face is literally putting something between you and other people. So you're not being genuine, you're not being yourself, and it's more performative. This is usually rooted in a lack of confidence in yourself. Maybe you don't trust yourself to show up how you want to be showing up or at the level you want to be showing up. So you're putting these unrealistic expectations on yourself, or you're so worried about other people's approval, you need that external validation, or you think you need that external validation. And I've also seen this idea of putting a face on, it's almost becomes a shield for you so that you're not fully seen. It's kind of this other angle of you're not being authentic because you don't feel safe enough to be authentic. You don't want to be fully seen because you don't think you'll be accepted. So you're being performative in what you think you should be doing that will be accepted. But again, you're just distancing yourself from other people and putting unrealistic expectations on yourself that's going to cause that extra stress, that extra anxiety, that extra work on yourself where you're constantly going through the hoops and filtering yourself and trying to be someone that you're not. I also see when people are in this style of perfectionism is that they have a hard time saying no. They tend to want to say yes to everything. They want to be super agreeable so that they are pleasing other people. You're going to say yes to anything they're asking of you, which can, of course, become detrimental to yourself if you're not careful. So some techniques to help yourself if you're in this perfectionism as a way to win approval. First, I want you to really get to know yourself better. Understand your core values, your strengths, what it is that you stand for, so that it can become easier to say no. And it's a way for you to connect with other people on a more authentic level by knowing who you are, what you stand for, and your core values. It becomes easier to make decisions. It becomes easier to say no. And that's my second technique here is practice saying no. No can be a complete sentence. You don't have to justify yourself. You can say no and everything will be okay. A lot of times we build that up in our heads too about saying no, when really sometimes you can say no and people will respect you more for saying no than just going along with it. Or you can then share your opinions of maybe a better idea and kind of counter or negotiate or come up with a better idea or brainstorm together. And it'll allow your strengths to come out more than if you're just always saying yes, always going with the flow and not thinking for yourself. Now on to our third type of perfectionism that I see a lot is perfectionism as a way to avoid negative emotions. Or another phrase you may have heard is toxic positivity. I've heard the term toxic positivity for a few years, and I've never thought about it from this angle of perfectionism until recently, where it was one of those light bulb moments that I realized this version of toxic positivity where you're constantly trying to be positive, you aren't letting your emotions be seen. It really does have this flavor of perfectionism because it's almost like you have to be seen as perfect. You have to be seen as positive, good-natured, everything's going great. You don't want anyone to see behind the scenes when things aren't going according to plan. You don't want anyone to see any negative emotions because you're maybe afraid of what they might think of you, or you're worried about this image. So I found this one is kind of a combination of the first two where you're setting this really high bar for yourself. You want to be able to control everything, but then you're also worried about that external image or that external validation from other people. So it's kind of the perfect storm of both of these combined into how you are behaving throughout the process of really high standards emotionally, and then also always putting on that face for other people along the way. So it honestly, just describing it, I'm like, this sounds exhausting. This is another variation of, robot Brittany, I would call it, or your robot self. But honestly, when you're doing that, you're not being human. You're not allowing yourself to feel the full range of emotions. You're denying yourself emotions. And I see this a lot where people think that any negative emotion is bad and they don't want to feel it, so they try to avoid it or they deny it and they deny themselves the actual feeling of it. And this only makes things worse. This is where you're just going to bottle up those emotions, deny yourself them, and then you're probably going to become like a boiling pot of water where all your emotions are just going to be boiling at the surface, and then any small situation could then become the final straw that makes you burst out all of these emotions that could then come out in yelling at someone else or crying in a situation that doesn't really make sense for you, but everything else has just built up and now all these emotions are going to come flooding out of your eyeballs. Yeah, this is just improper emotional regulation and a lack of emotional intelligence, to be honest. So if you're in this boat, you're probably trying to avoid difficult conversations, difficult situations, those difficult or seemingly negative emotions as a way to try to keep things maybe light, happy, but most of the time it's going to make you worse off. And usually the cause of this one is that you maybe don't know how to process your emotions, or maybe you were raised in a household that didn't talk about emotions or avoided difficult conversations and emotions, and you simply don't know how to handle that. It's honestly something that I wish we all learned a lot earlier in life and will make us all a lot better off when we can become better at naming our emotions, understanding them, being with them throughout the process, because the more you can feel them and allow yourself to feel them, the quicker you can move through them. Because when you are avoiding them, you're basically just bottling them up and it becomes a ticking time bomb, and we don't need that. So if this resonates with you, something that's super helpful is looking at an emotions wheel, and I'll link this in the show notes because these are really helpful visual that describes all different types of emotions. And it's a way to look at it visually to see where you're at in your emotions and put a name to it, which can be the key to honestly diffusing some of these emotions, especially the ones that feel negative or heavy that you're trying to avoid. Sometimes just by identifying what it is and putting that word to it and maybe saying it out loud, saying it to someone you trust, can allow you to just release it and just say, oh, that's why I've been feeling kind of weird the last few days, or that's why I've been kind of down or low energy, is that I've actually been really disappointed with that email that I got back from a client. And that in itself is super helpful to be able to pinpoint when those feelings started and maybe pinpoint it to a certain circumstance or situation can also help diffuse it, because otherwise, when we are just avoiding it, we don't know what the cause is, and it's just something like this cloud that hangs over us, and it's very mysterious. It just continues to pile on, and we're not addressing it head on. We're just avoiding it and letting it simmer and become worse. So we're almost taking the power away from it when we're able to name it, address the root cause, and then let it go. Another piece that can be really helpful here is just slowing down more, being with your own thoughts, maybe even meditating if you're open to it and ready for it. A lot of us, honestly, we're always on the go. We're always consuming media or TV or music or something. We're always listening, consuming, and we're not just alone with our thoughts in silence very often. And even spending 5 minutes a day alone with your thoughts, even if you're driving, just turning off the radio for a few minutes and seeing what pops up for you can be a really helpful way to navigate through your different emotions and release them a lot easier. All right, let's summarize the 3 different types of perfectionism and a few quick techniques for each of these. First, we have the perfectionism as a way to control, when you're trying to control every detail of a process and how you're executing that process. And here, I want you to remind yourself that change is inevitable and ask for help along the way. Second was perfectionism as a way to win approval. And if you're in this boat, I want you to get to know yourself better and your core values to make it easier to make decisions, but also practice saying no and know that it's going to be okay and people won't hate you if you say no. And then third is the perfectionism as a way to avoid negative emotions. Here you can practice looking at an emotions wheel to actually name your emotions and move through them easier, and just spend some more time with yourself in the quiet with your own thoughts as a way to process your emotions. All right, that is it for today's episode on perfectionism. Quick heads up that we only have 2 more episodes left of season 1. I can't believe we're already at the end here. But something that came to mind for me is that I'd love to do a live event, probably a webinar here in the next month or so. And I'd love to invite you all as a way to help hold you accountable between season 1 and 2, help you digest some of these concepts even deeper, and have access to me live so that you can ask questions and I can support you even further. Okay, that is it for today. I will see you in the next episode.